Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a place where we talk about what it means to be highly sensitive and empathic, how this impacts all aspects of our lives, and we explore tools, resources, and solutions so we can shift from absorbing all the thoughts, feelings, and energy of the world around us to being beacons for calm, love, and healing. Hey there, everybody. I am so excited to be here today, and I am so excited that my friend Britt Bolnick of In Arms Coaching is back with me today. But today, Britt is wearing a really different hat than usual. So if you've listened to previous episodes, you've heard Britt and I talking about time management for empaths, about just life and business as empaths, because she is an amazing business coach. But the thing you might not know about Britt is that she is also the founder of Pittie Posse Rescue and the CEO of this amazing doggy daycare boarding facility, grooming facility called The Barkyard. And so Britt and I have been having a conversation probably for the last 5+ years, but especially since Britt started, Pittie Posse 6 years ago now?
Yeah, coming up on 6 years.
We've been talking about the interface between empaths and animal rescue. And so you guys get ready because hold on to your hats because this is going to be one hell of a conversation. So Britt, I am so excited and delighted to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, and you're one of my absolute favorite people to talk to. So it's a great
it's a marriage made in heaven. It's an awesome thing. And so, you and I have talked about how much both of us have observed. And you actually were the one who really commented about this in the first place, about how you were really noticing how much empathic sensitivity is really such a challenge for so many people in rescue. So talk about this.
Yeah. I mean, should we just jump right in?
Let's jump right in.
So here's the thing. It's not just such a challenge for people in rescue, but people in rescue are most likely empaths.
Yes.
And that's what draws us to animal rescue, because the suffering and the plight of the animals that we're working with is so incredibly impossible for us to avoid understanding and feeling and seeing that we have to take action. So animal rescue is a field of empaths. And as such, we are also profoundly impacted by the work that we do because we feel it so strongly that we're here doing it in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and something you were commenting about is that also there are a number of empaths there are a lot of empaths who relate to animals more easily than they can relate to human beings. That especially if they've been through a lot of trauma, if they've been really hurt and betrayed by human beings, that animals feel like a safe haven. Mm-hmm. And so rescue becomes this place where they want to be connected to the beings that they can relate to. But then it also becomes kind of this vicious cycle, because you were saying, as we were talking last night, about how it's like animal rescue also kind of, you might not like people when you start animal rescue, but you really don't like people after you've been in it for a while.
Yeah, this is something that I've noticed personally, is that I've rescued for my whole life. So it's not like when we started Pittie Posse, I was new to the world of rescue, but I hadn't had as much to do with the people in rescue before I owned my own rescue. And dealing with the human beings is something that just is ever increasingly harder for me. And it definitely affects how I show up in my non-rescue circles, because people just exhaust me so much more than they did before I started rescue.
Absolutely. Well, and I have to say that I have been, as a friend of yours who gets to talk to you on a fairly regular basis, I've been floored, absolutely amazed at some of the stories that you have told me about some of the behavior that is happening in the greater rescue world. Like, I think most people who don't have anything to do with rescue kind of imagine that rescue is this place where all kinds of wonderful people gather and where people who just really love animals and want to help animals are coming together and making life better for animals. And that it's just this wonderful oasis of animal love and solution.
It's an amazing vision, Jen. I am all in for that. Unfortunately, that is absolutely not the case. And I think that we see, in rescue, we see a weird sort of self-selection of, yes, people who find it easier to get along with animals and who sometimes love animals more and who understand the purity and the trust of a relationship with an animal over a human. But we also have people who are closer to animals than people because they don't trust them or because they have their own emotional challenges that make it hard for them to be around people. We see people who have severe, trauma and just in general find a human world difficult to get along in. So they not default, they choose a life with more animals than humans. And then you just have, batshit crazy people. And the rescue world is absolutely, got a fair share of those.
And I have to say, that was one of the things that when you first started telling me some of these stories, I was like, wow, I had no idea. And I mean, I guess what occurs to me is that, certainly we all know about the crazy animal hoarders, the people who are just like they obviously love animals or they wouldn't have started bringing animals in and all of that. But I think we can sort of imagine those individuals. And I guess actually, as I think about it, it's almost like there's sort of a very fine line between animal hoarding and some of the people who end up doing especially kind of like their own private personal home rescue thing.
Yeah, that's a really important line and a really important distinction. And I think the thing is that whether you're an empath or not, if you are going to do rescue in a successful way that doesn't harm you or the animals you're trying to save, your own oxygen mask has to be firmly on. And that means that you need to be emotionally stable. You need to be financially stable. You need to have your own needs taken care of, because otherwise what happens is you go over the line and you become a person who is rescuing animals potentially to the detriment of their well-being and absolutely to the detriment of your own well-being.
Well, and you just said something that again, like you've raised the awareness in my mind in ways that I just had no idea before. But one of the things that you've talked about often is the fact that you have so many people whose empathic sensitivity is causing them so much distress about animals that they are basically taking food out of their own mouth, that they are like foreclosing on their mortgages, that they are going bankrupt, but they are basically not meeting their own basic needs. And they are pouring all of their money and their resources into animal rescue when they are really not putting their own oxygen mask on first.
Yeah. In order to help anything else, you have to be resourced. And that's a term that I love and I talk about all the time. Do you have the resources for yourself? And then do you have the resources to support another entirely dependent creature? And lots of people start rescues because they want to help. And what they're not considering is, that $18,000 bill for parvo puppies, or, the hundreds of pounds of dog food that you need a month, or, the regular vetting bills. We spend $2,500 at a drop on flea and tick preventatives every couple months,
Easily.
training, behavioral issues. Like there are just all these resources that you need in order to be able to help anything.
Yes.
And they have to, your cup has to be completely full. And then you have to think about the resources that you additionally have for another dependent creature, or 50 or 80.
I think that, I'm thinking about a particular other rescue person who I follow, and how often they speak about the lack of sleep that they're getting, the emergency, like they go from one crisis and one fire to another. But it's interesting because I can really see how they are not putting on their own oxygen mask first. And they are frequently, like, they are doing amazing work in the world for a particular breed. But at the same time, they are making themselves sick. And even like there was a point where they were sick with COVID and they just cannot take a break. And they also do not have an infrastructure because it's like them and their partner are the two primary people running this thing from their compound. And they are in a situation where they are depleted.
Yeah.
You know, another thing I've noticed, because I'm not a stranger to rescue myself. I started in, rescuing pugs many, many, many years ago, and actually briefly did a stint in being one of the people who was like a screening candidates for pug rescue. So I've actually been around the world of rescue myself, not to the extent that you have. But one of the things that I've started noticing as I watched rescue was another part of it is, it seems to me, and this is something I've noticed for empaths in general, is that when empaths are not self-regulating and our nervous systems are out of sync, and we are really in a state of like emotional free fall, we cannot triage emergencies, and we cannot distinguish between what is an emergency that needs our priority and our attention and what is an emergency that we need to sadly cut our losses about, or say, not my monkey, not my circus. And so one of the things I've noticed within rescue is every single dog is like an emergency that needs attention. And I'm sure that there are going to be people who are going to disagree with me about this. But for me, when I see somebody bringing in a 19-year-old dog with severe health issues that are clearly, any vet would be like, this dog is on their way out, and then having a rescue group go, oh my God, we have to save Sadie so that she can have 3 months of life, but we need to raise $20,000 for this surgery so she can have her last 3 months in love. To me, I'm like, that $20,000 could like save 4 or 5 parvo puppies. That $20,000 could be used for, like hip dysplasia surgery for a young 5-year-old dog. And the thing is, at least from my perspective, it seems sometimes with rescue, there's a certain quality of, there's not necessarily evaluating who are the viable rescues that our resources can go towards, that actually like really is like you're using your money towards something. Because I think the other thing is that a lot of people feel the urgency, feel the pain as empaths, and then feel compelled to save absolutely every animal, as opposed to being like, unfortunately, I can't save all of them.
Yeah, we started with a very clear mission and a motto that was almost an anti-motto, which is we can't save them all. And that's one of our guiding mottos. And it's a very controversial position to take in the dog rescue world in this country.
Yes.
Because there are huge, very, very powerful, very well-known organizations whose mottos are literally, we can save them all. And we have always operated from the fact that as a country, we are not set up, equipped, or able to save them all. But I think that what you're talking about also touches on something else that's really important, which is that in rescue, you have to examine where your motives are coming from.
Yes.
And there's a lot of martyr complex. There's a lot of savior complex. There's a lot of reactionary mode. And that's one of the reasons that when I started Pittie Posse, I didn't start it alone. I mean, I had my husband who I wouldn't have done it without him because I knew I couldn't do it alone. But we also started a team from the very, very beginning.
Yes.
And we have gone through multiple iterations, and the best people have stayed and the craziest people have gone crazy and left, quite literally sometimes. But we have a team. So we make decisions as a team. We check each other. There's always one rational person when everybody else is crying saying, well, let's think about it this way. And because it is a collective, it is a mission-based collective of people, when we do get into reactionary mode, which is usually a medical emergency, we still make the decision as a team and we think about our resources. For instance, we will 100% bend over backwards, even if we know that we're helping a dog that might have a $20,000 medical bill. We will, however, think very cautiously about a severe behavior case.
Yes.
Because that's a resource question. We can absolutely pull money out of our butt through fundraising instantaneously. Can we find a good spot for a dog with a severe behavior issue? Is it the right thing to do? Can we find a trainer for them? Probably not.
Probably not.
So we will think about that much more carefully.
Yeah.
But we're thinking about it as a team, and that pulls us out of reactionary mode because there's always at least two of us who are saying, well, let's consider it from this angle.
Yes. Well, and you're pulling out and talking about two incredibly important things about this. One is that you understood that you could not do a solo rescue and that this was not a job for one single person. And sadly, there are a number of people who are in rescue
Most of them.
who are not resourced or who do not have, who are not networked, who do not have community. And God bless every empathic rescuer who is so sensitive that they don't really work well with people. One of the really big challenges with that is that the only way your rescue is going to survive is by getting money from other people.
Yeah,
because we live in a money world. And it has to be community-based. But it's sort of almost the reason why I think some people go into rescue is because they don't love human beings.
Right.
But you got to be in relation.
Because you have to work with humans to work with animals. And most animal professionals will tell you that it's the worst part of the job, is working with the humans.
Yes.
But we solve for that in the rescue. So for instance, I'm very reluctant to get on the phone most of the time.
Right.
Do not want to get on the phone. We have several volunteers who specifically will just pick up the phone and call people.
Yes.
When we have something, when somebody calls, when somebody says I need to get on the phone, if someone needs to get on the phone with them, I have 3 of our people who are like, no problem, I'll call them right now, and couldn't care less about it.
Right.
So we know we have people in the organization to do specific things. And most of them are things, all of them are things that I can't do or won't do or just don't have the time to do.
Right. The other thing that you were talking about, and I have this additional thought that's coming up with this. The other thing that you were talking about is the idea of we have to do our emotional work, that in order to be able to do effective rescue, we cannot be in a reactive state. And I mean, if you've listened to many of my podcasts or read my book, you know that I'm constantly talking about the difference between responding and reacting.
Yes.
And how incredibly important it is for us to be able to respond, but that you have so many people who are doing rescue from reaction instead of response.
And it's dangerous.
It is dangerous.
It's acutely dangerous. And I'll give a couple of different examples.
Awesome.
It's dangerous because if you're not resourced, you will find yourself in a hole that, I know rescue workers who have gone into financial ruin, who have lost their homes, who have lost marriages and relationships with their children or their parents or their friends. But on the other end, I also know rescue workers who are so unresourced that eventually a mistake is made with an animal.
Yes.
And someone is hurt or an animal is hurt.
Yes.
And you can lose your rescue. You can be the object of a giant lawsuit. You can put people's lives at risk. And we're very conscious of the fact that we are working with a, mixed breed genre that does have some degree of prejudice against us. And we consider the dogs that we're turning into the community as ambassadors. So, when we make a decision, we make it as a group. And we make it from a place of looking at the highest good of the rescue. And the easiest example of that is when we have to do a behavioral euthanization. And we've done probably 6 in 6 years, 5 or 6. And it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking.
But
and
it is so necessary.
It is so necessary. And I just want to say thank you because I've had a few conversations over the years with people who are in like veterinary medicine. I attended a training at one point. I landed at a training, a dog training that turned out to be an advanced dog training about dogs with behavioral issues. I kind of happened to know what was happening and went to it as a workshop and then was kind of like, oh, wow, I'm in this place. But it was incredibly valuable because one of the things, this was a very advanced trainer who really talked about behavioral issues and talked about things to look for. What are the kinds of things that are like almost like non-negotiable? And when do you have to call it? When do you have to basically say, this is not repairable? And, one thing, and I'll just say as a dog owner, and I mean, I am a seasoned pug owner. We're on our 5th pug. And I've definitely had my fair share of adapting and adjusting and dealing with rescue. We also have rescued most of our cats. What I will say is that people assume that they, by their nature, are just going to be able to like rescue a dog and be groovy. And the truth is that dogs require knowledge and understanding, and they require consistency, and they also require a great deal of energy and dedication. And I think a lot of people, and especially this kind of leads me back to a thought I was having about just rescue, is that I think a lot of people want to be part of the solution, but they have no real idea of what is involved in running a rescue. And so they decide to run the rescue from a place of reaction, from a place of urgency, because their heart is breaking, but with very little understanding of, if not, like maybe they understand animal behavior, maybe they understand how to take care of dogs, but if they don't also understand the need for community, they don't also understand the need for financial resources and a way to continue to get money to come in, that it is almost destined to fail. And it seems to me that this message is almost like an invitation to people to really question their motives of why are you thinking that you should start a new rescue, which also leads me to why not, if you really feel called to participate in rescue, why not participate in an established system where there are structures in place for raising money, for being resourced and everything.
Where you're a part of a team instead of trying to reinvent a wheel by yourself alone.
Right. Going back to the behavioral thing, though, what was so powerful about this workshop or class that I took was the awareness of the fact that there are some things that are just completely irrevocable and unfixable. And I do think as empaths, we sometimes get because we're so good at communicating with many things, including animals, and we're often really good with animals in a way that non-empaths aren't. I think sometimes we have this fantasy that we could rescue a behavioral issue or an animal with behavioral issues, and somehow just our love alone is going to fix it.
And it won't.
It won't.
And it won't.
It won't. I mean,
and it's not always fair either.
It's not always fair.
You're talking about an animal that is stressed and is often anxious and is not having a good time, and that's one of the things we consider. When we're facing a behavioral euthanization, we consider, first of all, public safety.
Yes.
And the human safety. And we also consider the quality of life of the dog.
Yes.
Which is something that I think a lot of folks don't consider in the we can save them all. Like a dog in a cage in boarding for 3 years is better than the dog being put to sleep. Well, I don't know that that's true. And I think that suffering is 100 times worse than a peaceful death. Which I would rather deliver to an animal than have them suffer.
I am so there with you. And I mean, some of it I think also has to do with perspective, spirituality, and perception of what is death. And you and I both coming from a very woo background and very much an earth-centered background. I think you and I both sort of regard life and death as a cycle that we participate in. And I certainly believe that there is more than just this lifetime and this incarnation. And so I think sometimes when we get caught up in this idea of like, oh my God, I have to pour $25,000 into saving this 19-year-old dog who has cancer and multiple issues, that we're not necessarily taking into consideration the bigger picture and the fact that sometimes death is not the word, death is not an insult. It's not the worst thing that can happen. It is the inevitable end that we all face. And what we do have a choice on is how that death happens. I would rather that we take a dog for its best day ever to the beach and for a Big Mac and for a puppuccino, and then it goes for a nap in its person's arms. I would rather have that happen than have a dog bounced and bounced and bounced and people thinking that love is going to fix a behavior issue. And potentially people getting bit in the process. And then the dog being dragged off at the end of a catch pole after its 6th home, which at each home it's getting more anxious and more heartbroken. That to me is horrible. I would much rather a humane euthanasia than that end. Yes. Yes. And just thinking about what we understand and know in regards to trauma, but also about the idea of the sort of the collective trauma that gets sort of, amplified and becomes exponential and expands. If you think about the difference between basically rescuing a dog from a life of misery, even if it means Big Mac and puppuccino and going for a nap, that is real. That is not contributing to 6 years of continued trauma and misery into the collective of trauma that we have as our in the world. I keep thinking about this woman many, many years ago. I had a client who was an advanced, like she was an oncology vet tech, very seasoned, like brilliant person, very knowledgeable about dogs, very, very knowledgeable about personalities. One of the first people who I knew who was a devotee to pitties. And at a certain point after, like she had 2 pit bulls, one of them, she opted to euthanize. And it was at the time, she was the first person that I met who was like, this became a behavioral issue that was not fixable because what had happened with this dog was that they, as a puppy, they were lovely. As an adolescent, they were a little bit unmanageable, but around the age of like 3-4 years old, they started to become very aggressive with the other dogs and around them. And they basically got to the point where this dog was just unprovoked attacking on a regular basis. And she basically said, it is clear that the genetic, like this dog had been genetically, like their genes were causing them to decline and decompensate the older they got, and their behavioral issues. And this was a person who, this is not a dog who endured trauma and who needed to be, who needed to be like decompressed in rehab. This was a dog who had been brought into a loving home with a very, very seasoned dog owner who understood the breed and who took no shit. And even with all of that, she watched this trajectory from a happy little puppy to an increasingly agitated and aggressive dog.
And anxious, probably.
Anxious dog, very anxious. And I think she even had them, I mean, because she was a vet tech, she's like, I think she even had the dog on Prozac. So she had tried all the other avenues. And then just basically reached a point where she was like, I have to call this. It will not, it is not in my best interest. It is not in this dog's best interest. It is certainly not in the pack's best interest to try to pretend that this violence is not escalating and this behavioral issue is outside of our capacity.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that this brings us back to is that if you're an empath working with animals, you have to be doing your own work.
You have to be doing your own work.
You have to be doing your own work. Yes. Because you have to be growing and evolving as a human, or you're going to make decisions from a place of reaction and your own pain that don't benefit anybody around you, yourself included.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So actually, as we're having this piece of conversation about you have to do your own work, let's talk about how do you do your own work? Like what are some of the strategies?
I talk to you almost every day. I think the first one was really to have a team. And, even in the beginning, though we started with a team, they were like the adoption coordinator, the foster coordinator. We very quickly, among our bigger team, we made a little team that we called like the inner circle or something. And those were the people that I went to when I said, what do I do about this? Or this is a problem. So absolutely having your own council of other wise people who can give you perspective and help you see things more clearly and sound in. Yeah. That has been absolutely, I couldn't have done it without that.
Well, and what I'm really thinking as I'm hearing you say this is that for the people who go into rescue because they cannot tolerate human beings,
it's not a good choice.
It's not a good choice. And unfortunately, it's like, I get that you really, really, really want to help the animals. But if you cannot communicate with human beings comfortably without feeling an incredible amount of distress, the best thing you can do to help animals is actually help yourself to not be in a state of complete social anxiety and distress so that you can't even approach a veterinarian or you can't even approach a potential
or an adopter or a
funder.
Yeah, or a team member.
Well, and was it you that was talking about, I can't remember if it was you or somebody else that was talking about or telling me about somebody in rescue who had become increasing, like they really had issues with people. So they had gotten super, super selective and just would not relinquish any dogs to anybody because they kind of could not have a conversation with somebody.
That happens.
Yeah.
That is a thing that happens. And the other thing about humans is that, you know, one of the things that I have going for me is that in many ways, Pittie Posse was started in a business model.
Yes.
And that has really, really helped. We branded from the beginning, which has been, I mean, people buy things with the Pittie Posse logo to wear Pittie Posse swag. And that is kind of not seen, other than things like Tiatoras and Villalobos and Pitbulls and Prolies. You don't see people buying branded things just to rock rescue gear. So we started as a brand, and we started with legitimate social media people who grew our brand on social media. But the thing that has really helped has been this people skills that I have, which admittedly are selective and not the best. I am really good at growing and managing teams of people and communities. So I have been able to grow and love and nurture our teams. And our teams are what carry Pittie Posse. And if you can't get along with people, or you don't know how to put people in charge and trust them, or how to foster your team's growth and evolution, you're going to be back to a one-woman circus, and it's going to be an ugly one, and the monkeys will all be rabid and throwing their own poop at people.
Yes. And the thing is, if you cannot, I mean, the thing about, you know, this actually reminds me of something that has been a growth process for me, about understanding that as an individual person, when I sense the needs, I am not a charitable organization. And, you know, I mean, bear with me for a second, because I remember many lives being in the convents and the temples where all I had to do was get up, show up, like eat my gruel, and then show up for a day of service where the people or the things were coming to me and I just had to do my work. There was no connection between work and money. I just woke up, did my work, and it was not a big deal. It was a rude awakening for me in this lifetime where I was like, what? I don't just get to wake up out of my bed in the temple and just go do the thing and be done at the end of the day and not have to worry about money. Other people are taking care of it. And so from that, I started to understand that I needed to run a business, but I was doing it in as a tattooer, where it was easier to think of it as a business. But what's been fascinating is, as I've moved back to more of a helping profession and more of a healing profession, I have had to re-navigate the part of me that feels like it's my obligation to meet the needs of anybody that shows up. And it's my obligation to give it away for free, to be a charitable organization. And it's only been really recently that I started to understand that charitable organizations have entire infrastructures set up to generate the resources that are needed to serve the population that needs to be served. A business generally is serving, it's like a business is often like receiving the money from the population it is serving. Whereas a charitable organization is receiving money from a different set of people and serving a different audience. But the thing is, money is coming into a charitable organization. And there is an infrastructure set up for all of these things to be run so that the salaried people who are providing the support to the humans or animals are getting their needs met. What I see as a problem for actually not just rescuers, but many light workers is that we do not understand. We only see problem and service. We do not see system and infrastructure that is needed to support and sustain it. And as long as we are thinking of ourselves as a one-person charity, that then we're funding the charity from our job or whatever else it is, it is destined to fail, because we are constantly taking our own oxygen mask off and giving it to everybody else and not getting our needs met. And for me, this was revelatory when I was like, you know what? Charitable organizations still make money.
They make a lot of money.
A lot of money. You know, the idea of nonprofit doesn't mean that there isn't money generated. It's just that it is being like, it's about the way the money is is circulated and for what it is being used.
And that it comes in from one source and goes out to another.
Yeah, it comes in.
It's a business where it comes in from one source and then
delivers to the same source. Like in a business, you've got almost like a circle where it's like it's a closed system.
Yeah.
Charitable organizations and rescues in their best form are not closed systems. They are actually open systems. And they also understand that there is a constant need for more resources.
Yep.
Because, I mean, especially when you're talking about animal rescue after the pandemic, where we have all of these extremely unsocialized animals, but especially unsocialized dogs who are coming out. People are going back to work and they're like, oh my God, my dog is a spaz. I don't know what to do with him. Here, take my dog. That we're suddenly in this position where we're being inundated even more than we were before with animals that are needing a lot of resources. And so it's a constant, there needs to be a constant influx of resources and money coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. And one person cannot make that happen. And one person doesn't have the skill set. In general, the person who will stay up all night nursing a sick animal does not have the skill set or the bandwidth to make sure that the money is coming in to pay for that animal.
Well, and if you're staying up all night and nursing an animal, or if you are, you have a pregnant animal who is, and you're whelping and you're just like going through the birthing of an animal, you are not in the position to get up the next morning looking like a hot mess and begging people for money. I mean,
go to work for the job that pays you to feed that dog and get it. Yeah, absolutely.
It is. I mean, it's just such an incredible setup for failure. And that is absolutely something that I've seen within the rescue world, is this thing of like, they don't get any sleep because they're dealing with a sick animal. And then they're recording a reel earlier in the morning where they look like a train wreck and talking about how hard it is and just being like, hey, please give me money. There's a place for that, for sure. But then on top of that, but that is rarely enough to generate the kinds of resources that people need.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, we always think at Pittie Posse, we always think about, how are we making this sustainable? We have huge visions. How are we making this sustainable and scalable? And what do we need in place to do that? And it sure as hell is not only my brain and my energy, because that is incredibly limited.
No. Well, and I was just thinking, I imagine in some ways that this particular interview is probably gonna really like polarize people. and that if you're listening to this and you've never thought about some of this stuff, that this might be kind of controversial and kind of like, like even piss you off. Because we're talking about limitations and we're talking about being realistic about what is involved in rescue. And because so many people come into it from a place of emotional wounding, from a place of empathic urgency, and from a place of like, something has to be done. And since I can't imagine there's anybody else out there who's doing something, I need to be the one to do it right now. That unfortunately, the system is what it is right now.
And you also have to be incredibly honest about whether or not it is a martyr situation that you set up to pour all your energy and focus into, so that you don't have to look at your own stuff.
Right.
And that just has to be called out. There are too many people in the field of rescue that are using their insanity as a reason to not look at their own stuff.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, the animals will suffer. And it's not like probably better than anyone other than my husband and my child, that I am not perfect, but I look at my own stuff.
You do look at your own stuff.
And it is a part of my process.
Yeah.
And I check myself very carefully for when I'm stepping into savior complex or martyr complex.
Well, and you also really do. I mean, like when you're not sure, I have certainly had conversations with you where you're like, is this my bullshit or is this? And I'm not afraid to say to you, Britt, you need to back the truck up, because I do think you're reacting here. And I do think you are seeing this through a distorted lens of trauma, or you're triggered and you're like, you do not need to go in with your dukes up here.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
Everybody needs someone to say, I think you're wrong.
Yeah.
I think I think you might want to look at that again.
Well, and Katie Gall and I were having a conversation the other day as we were recording an episode. We were recording this episode about ADHD, and which was just incredible. And we were talking about this phenomenon within the spectrum of ADHD, which is rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I actually think, and there's a very fine line between people with sensory processing disorder, with people who have ADHD and empaths. Like, empaths are in the neurodiverse. We are in the neurodiverse category, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think that often empaths, whether we have ADHD or not, I think we often also suffer from rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And the thing about that is when you are not resourced and you've never had an opportunity to do your work, and especially if you've got rejection sensitivity dysphoria and you're afraid of being ashamed for looking at your stuff, it makes it very, very hard to go and get a reality check because shame comes up anytime somebody says, maybe that wasn't the swiftest idea here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard work. It is absolutely hard work. But I feel like if you love the animals, whether or not you love yourself, if you love the animals, you owe it to them to really be careful about how you move into and through the world of rescue. And, if you really do love animals and you want to make a big difference, then it makes sense that you do what you need to do to sustain and feed yourself so that you can be around to make a difference. And to take a bigger picture for the change that you want to see in the world, that you want to be a part of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I was thinking about an example of somebody where rescue became the catalyst for their own healing, where instead of them just sort of being batshit crazy and imploding, I believe they came into rescue because they had so much trauma and so many wounds. But what's been interesting in watching this person's experience is that the rescue kind of brought out their trauma, but instead of it being that they kept on avoiding their trauma and avoiding their pain and doubling down on rescue to sort of go into the insanity of rescue and stepping away from it, actually what has happened is they have realized they need to do their own work. And in their case, they stepped away from rescue because they realized that it was too traumatizing to be watching these scenes with their history of a great deal of abuse and abandonment, to be seeing these dogs going through the same thing they went through in their childhood over and over again.
And actually, beautiful decision.
And actually, I'd like to really offer that to anybody who's listening to this and you have a history of abuse, you have a history of trauma, and you have decided that the way you're going to work this through is by going into rescue, but you've not done your personal work on this. Chances are what's going to happen is that every single animal you find is going to reflect the hell you went through. But if you do not deal with your own hell and you do not deal with your own wounds, what's going to happen is you're going to be triggered and activated, and then you're going to be forming conclusions and making many decisions based not on your resourced adult state, but more on your extremely wounded, very reactive, like inner child who's like somewhere between the ages of like 2 and probably 6.
And at the mercy of this is an animal.
At the mercy of this is an animal who you want to help.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I've said this so many times about empaths, is that I don't like to think of empaths as codependent, because I feel like it's a disservice to why we want to rescue. We want to help other people, other animals, the planet, all of these things. We want to rescue other people and other beings and other environments, like everything that is expressing distress and is expressing pain, because as highly sensitive empathic people, especially when we do not know how to sit with our own pain, what happens is we get flooded by the pain that is coming from the world outside us. And because it is so uncomfortable to have the pain inside us activated and triggered, what we then do is we rush to rescue because we feel better when the situation feels better. And so it creates this cycle of feeling compelled to rescue and save because we get the temporary relief of feeling better. Except that the problem, particularly with like animal rescue and I would say probably like climate change and a number of, and like racism and sexism, is that we are talking about a systemic problem that is so large that you can easily, like you might see the dog that is drowning in the whirlpool and feel the need to go jump into that, like that whirlpool of hell. But the next thing you know, you are getting sucked down by that whirlpool and you are going down with it.
Mm-hmm. Which is why you can't rescue without your own life preserver or oxygen mask on.
Right. So you spoke about how, having a team is your absolute first priority in terms of self-care with rescue. And, unlike just empathic rescue and how do we take care of ourselves, it's interesting that, usually I'm talking about the first step to empathic mastery is just recognizing what's yours and what's not yours. I love how what you're basically saying is in order to create rescue that's going to be effective and functional, a team is the absolute first priority.
Yeah.
And that does bring us to, in some ways, you have to do the empathic mastery work so that you are able to invite a team in as your and make it your first priority.
I mean, there's a first step actually before that, which is really just understanding that your own well-being and self-care has to be prioritized. And that's why I had it. That was inherent in my decision to have a team, that I can't be the only person, that I need 8 to 10 hours a night of sleep and I'm not compromising on them, that I won't get on the phone, that I don't always know the best answer, and that I need support. That was implicit in the establishment of a team. And I would say that even, in order to set up the self-care, you have to have boundaries. You have to have healthy boundaries.
You have to have healthy boundaries. Yep. And you also have to be able to ask for help.
Yep.
And that's something that I really, and accept it. And that is something that I really appreciate about you is your ability to cultivate community and also to put it out there and say, I have this need, who can help me with it? And if you're carrying around a lot of empathic wounds, if you're carrying around a lot of just traumatic wounds, these things can be next to impossible. And so it's like, I hope as you guys are listening to this, you're realizing like, oh, maybe I shouldn't just set up that breed rescue because I have a love for this breed, and really start thinking about like backpedal into, are you emotionally stable enough? Are you emotionally healthy enough? Are you really ready? And the other thing I just love that you were saying that just keeps coming to my mind is like, recognizing your strengths and recognizing your weaknesses. No human being is like a Renaissance person who has every single skill. We all have our wheelhouses and we all have the things that we absolutely suck at. And when it comes to rescue, there are too many tasks involved in rescue for and skill sets for somebody to be able to manage them all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's another part of it is like, I think people just think, well, if I just started or if I just build it, they will come. But it's sort of like, if you keep on thinking you're going to be able to handle every single task that is before you with this, not happening.
No, and you have to build it first. You have to have it in place because animal rescue is a flood. So if you don't have things set up before you start, you're not going to get them set up after it starts.
Right.
You're just going to get more and more underwater.
Well, and as you're saying it, it's like you got to have, if you're going to go rescue people from the flood, you got to have a boat.
Yep.
Like you cannot go wading into the water with like a life jacket on.
And figure it out when
you get to the people. It's like you need a boat and you need supplies and you need resources and you need to be ready and have a plan. Otherwise, you who is the rescuer can easily become a burden to the system. This is actually part of my message about if you do not deal with your empathic distress as an empath, you are contributing to the problem by amplifying the distress that is in this world. And only by dealing with your own distress can you start focusing on the solution instead of the problem. And if you just go walking into rescue with no resources, no tools, and just a desire to help, you're going to be another one of the hungry, drowning victims. You are not going to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
And I do think that this goes into the martyr complex, the savior complex, and also sometimes I don't want to look at my shit, so I'm going to distract myself with this major, major crisis.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we've got a few minutes left with this conversation. It's amazing how quickly time flies by in these incredible conversations. I would really love to hear. So we've talked about the knowing yourself, establishing, like recognizing what are your strengths and weaknesses, creating community around you, having boundaries and knowing your limitations and like what you need. Like for example, you need 8 to 10 hours of sleep every single night. What are the other self-care tools that as a rescuer, you are like, these are my go-tos. I absolutely need them. They're non-negotiables.
Yeah. Tools for stress. Absolutely. I can't have a lot of stress in my life, so I have a lot of tools for negotiating it down and even stepping back when I see it impending. Good food is really, really important to me. I think my husband and I talked about this. We spend more money on food than anything other than our mortgage, and that is A-okay with me.
Yeah.
Really good food. And then laughter. You have to be able... Laughter is the magic that battles the absolute despair of rescue.
Absolutely.
So laughing and being in nature and doing things to take care of myself and being with good friends and having sounding boards, all of those are imperative tools in the toolbox.
Absolutely. So laughter, what are your favorite ways to laugh? What are the ways that you can find laughter?
It's so silly, but right now I'm just on a major TikTok bender. There are just a couple people on TikTok that I will just hit, the replay button over and over again and just laugh till I pee myself. Funny movies, hanging out with my daughter, who's really, really funny.
She is.
She is awesome.
She is witty and wry.
Is really, really witty. And just doing stupid things with my husband, just making each other laugh and making sure that we have time to connect. We do a nightly, almost nightly beach walk after dinner. And that's just our time to like be in the ocean water and talk to each other and laugh and plan. And then I think the other thing that's really important is the overall vision of the rescue that gets us out of the day-to-day. And this is what we want to see. This is the change that we want to see. This is our 5-year goal. Many rescues just operate to sort of take homeless animals and put them in homes. And we have a much bigger vision than that. And that really helps me come out of the day-to-day and really remember what's important and prioritize.
So I'm really hearing like you like being driven, like your sort of guiding North Star is your like your big why. And that always returning to that big why and understanding how vital that is. So I want to circle back to your comment about stress management and having tools for stress. You just said having tools for stress. I need more specific information than that.
So just like the simplest meditation. I mean, I have like Insight Timer on my phone. I'll just plug it in. Sitting, hugging a tree is really, really good and so instantaneous. And there are very few people among us, unless you're incarcerated, who don't have access to a tree in every day in some shape or form. Laughter is a really good one. Epsom salt baths, if I can't get in the ocean, because we have so much ocean here, but it's so damn cold. It's hard for me to get into. So Epsom salt baths, EFT, always. I've done work with you over the years. I also just have like quickie videos that I can just put on. What else? Snuggling with my dog, napping, herbs.
I know reading is one of your favorite things too.
Yes.
Like just like stepping away and picking up a book and just reading.
A book and buttered popcorn with nutritional yeast is my drug of choice. That combo is my
your go-to to unplug. Well, and you were saying the other day as we were talking about like, taking space and taking time for yourself is one of the things that you and I have been talking a lot about for years, like how incredibly important it is to take time for yourself. And that you, as you know, now you have an adult or not adult, but nearly adult daughter who is capable of, you know, feeding herself, cleaning herself, clothing herself, going actually to work for herself. Like she's capable of functioning now. But when she was a very needy toddler who needed to be on your body pretty much 24/7 when you weren't working as a bartender, that, you know, what you had said was like all you could carve out was 60-second increments of time to go into the bathroom
and lock the door and light a candle.
Yeah.
And that was what I started with, 60 seconds.
60 seconds.
Anybody can take 60 seconds for themselves.
Anybody can take 60 seconds for themselves.
So it's a great place to start with. Can you stop what you're doing for 60 seconds, sit in the dark, light a candle, close your eyes?
Right.
That's it.
Right. Just find a place, go put yourself somewhere and stop. You know, and I think we live in a culture right now where so many people are like, well, I can't. And I'm like, start with what you can do.
And you have to choose it. It's very easy for us to all say, I can't. You know, back in New York City, I was thinking, why did I say a dark bathroom? I lived in New York City. It's frowned upon to stand on the street corner and hug a tree. So I lived in New York City. So it was 60 seconds in the bathroom in the dark with a candle. Now it could be 60 seconds with your bare feet on the earth or hugging a tree or just lying on your bed. Every one of us can. There is nobody who can't.
Right.
We choose not to.
Well, and even if you are incarcerated, you know, you can still, and I mean, unless you are in solitary and you are in a room with absolutely no windows and absolutely nothing, you know, you can look up at the sky. You can put your feet on the ground outside. And, you know, even if you are in a cubicle, a closed room with no access to anything like any scene of nature, you can still send your roots down through the many layers of concrete. You can send your roots down to the earth. You still have your mind to work with, and you can connect to the earth.
Yep.
You know, I was in Manhattan, a couple years ago now with one of my other dear friends and her 2 daughters and son. And we had been wandering around Manhattan all day. Actually, it had been a couple days that we'd been wandering around. And we got to Central Park, and it was like me and the 2 girls just made a beeline for the tree, the nearest tree. And there's this photograph of the 3 of us just hugging the tree because we were just like, ah. But, you know, if you are in a position where it feels like, oh my God, I do not want to be seen as a tree hugger, I will just say that all you need to do is, like, if you're not comfortable with the idea of hugging a tree, like if that's a little too woo or weird for you, or you're going to feel like a hippie, put the palm of your hand on the tree and just feel the tree and connect to it.
And breathe.
And breathe with the tree. Like, just connect, because trees know how to be grounded in a way that we have forgotten. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Britt, it is amazing. We are coming to the top of the hour. I could talk with you about all this stuff for hours. And we do. So how can people get in touch with you and Pittie Posse?
Yeah. So pittieposse.com, PITTIEPOSSE. We have a huge presence on Facebook and Instagram. There might even be a TikTok channel right now. I'm not sure because I'm not the one who does it, which is amazing.
Team, you guys. See, somebody else doing the work.
Exactly. That I don't even know about. If you are interested in dog training or daycare or boarding and you live in Maine, you can go to the Barkyard, Maine, or just look us up on Facebook. We also have a Facebook page. And you can always shoot me an email at britt@inarmscoaching.com.
You know, and the other thing I just want to make a plug for is Britt's book, The Magic of Bending Time, because so much of what we are talking about is about being deliberate with your time, being realistic about what your skills are, what your wheelhouse is, what you are good at and what you are not good at.
And setting healthy boundaries.
So Britt, this has been an amazing conversation. You guys, fear not if you didn't catch the URLs as they whipped by, they will be in the show notes. And thank you.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Oh my God, this was amazing. Yeah. Just amazing. Oh, and you guys, if you're in the Maine area and you're feeling called, like consider becoming a foster for Pittie Posse. Consider and
Adopting.
also consider adopting. But the other thing is, even if you're not resourced or in a position to contribute to rescue, to run a rescue or do a rescue or even volunteer for a rescue, even $3 can make a huge difference.
The share button.
Or hitting the share button.
Trying to get adopted.
Yes, hitting the share button. So please, if you are listening to this podcast, share it with all of the animal lovers you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Britt.
Thank you.
As we come to the end of this episode, I'd love to hear what you're taking from this show. Please jump over to empathicmasteryshow.com to leave your comments. In the show notes, you'll find a link to grab your copy of my Empathic Safety Guide, 3 Basics for Finding Calm in the Eye of the Storm. And while you're there, please subscribe and follow this show. And thank you for your help sharing this show with the people who need it. Please help me to spread the word and send this podcast to friends or family members who need support living as highly sensitive empathic people. Then join me again when the next Empathic Mastery Show airs. Okay, one last time. Hop over to empathicmasteryshow.com for your Empathic Safety Guide. And until next show, shine on. We need you and your gifts here on this planet. So please don't judge your empathic rainbow by colorblind standards.